We've talked about the issues that affect country South Australia, but tonight we talk about its people, those on the margins of society and those who don't want to be marginalised because of where they live. I'm Perry Strathern, welcome, and in front of me are Family First Senator Bob Day, Labor MP Nick Champion, Liberal Senator Anne Ruston, Senator Nick Xenophon and Green Senator Robert Sims. Welcome. We'll turn first to health and rehabilitation services in the country. For people with mental health challenges, with drug and alcohol challenges, are we doing enough? What do you think? I'll take any answer. Anne Ruston?
Look, I mean, this is an area where there is an ever-increasing demand for services. And, you know, we've only got to look at particularly one of the great issues that are before our rural and regional communities at the moment is the epidemic of ice in our communities. And I think, you know, I come from a community where there is a huge concern about that. So I think there is absolutely no doubt that we need to be looking at this at a regional level, and we need to look at the services that each and every region needs. I think taking a holistic approach to it is fine in terms of trying to generate resources, but we need to be very specific about the individual needs within each of our communities, particularly the primary healthcare needs. So I'm a great supporter of making sure that in any of these services that the first thing we do is we put the patient first and make sure that we concentrate the resources that we need to the patient and certainly not to the administration.
Well, we do need to see resources directed to regional Australia and of course regional South Australia as part of that, and during the election campaign the Greens have announced a plan to boost funding for mental health in particular in the regions, because we do recognise that this is a big issue in regional areas, often because people are isolated from key services and supports, so we need to see that rolled out. In terms of the issue around ice and other forms of drugs, we are really concerned that the current approach to drugs is not working. It's often framed as a law and order issue, but really this should be framed as a health issue, and we need to see a harm minimisation approach. The leader of the Greens, Richard Di Natale, is a doctor by trade, and he's been travelling around the country to do roundtables with experts in this field, and the Greens have really been leading a discussion around how we can look at harm minimisation to deal with ice and other drugs.
A softer approach than the war on drugs?
Well, a more effective approach.
Bob Day?
Look, family first, you know, we're great believers in every family, job and a house. There's a direct link between unemployment and a whole lot of social ills, you know, everything from, you know, crime and drugs and domestic violence and teenage pregnancy and even suicide. Family First is a great believer in strengthening families, supporting families, that particularly have members of the family who are, you know, succumb to the, you know, situation with drugs, you know.
So having effective services is part of that.
Very much on prevention rather than cure.
Look, it's both a law and order and a health issue. When I have families calling me about their loved one, their son or daughter or partner that are in the grip of an ice addiction, those people in the grip of that addiction cannot make a free choice about what is best for them. We need to look at the system in Sweden where there is, in exceptional circumstances, mandatory rehabilitation in very well-funded facilities, a private hospital type facility, so that they can break that cycle of addiction. So I think we actually do need that approach if someone's in the grip of a drug as evil as ice or a drug like heroin, which is similarly evil. The other issue in terms of law and order, I actually think the state government of South Australia had a good idea when it said you ought to be able to seize all the assets of major drug dealers, but where I differ with the state government is rather than going into consolidated revenue, a significant proportion of that, at least half, ought to go to rehabilitation services.
Nick Champion.
Well, if you look, I went to an ice forum the other night and one of the panellists talked about how nonsensical it is to have adverts on TV about ice addiction with no helpline number. And I mean, I guess that's one of, you know, one of the great disappointments of the most recent campaign is that it highlighted the problem but did not provide an avenue for the solution for both addicts and their family. And there's no doubt that ice is a very powerfully destructive drug, both in its addictive sort of arc and also the damage it does to the human mind. It would have been better if there hadn't been $1 billion in cuts to the health flexible funds that fund some of the organisations in alcohol and drug rehabilitation. And these are the very services and the very experts who are going to, be able to assist families. Addiction is a very, very terrible thing for families to have to deal with, not just illicit drugs, but also alcohol. And the destruction of the person is obviously a very distressing thing for families to have to go through. We do have to be, I think, pretty careful in this area of, if you like, jumping to mandatory style solutions. It's I think addiction is a complex thing, and my observation about addiction is that you really have to have the addicts' cooperation. They've got to want to get out of it for it to be successful in the longer term. Might be successful in the shorter term, but in the longer term, addiction there tends to be relapses. It tends to be a very rocky road, and I think we need to be pretty careful about jumping to conclusions about solutions.
Would a Labor government look to restore the funding that you mentioned?
Well, I think we've got to be, careful to maintain what's there at the moment. The government seems to be running funds through the primary healthcare networks. We've committed to continue to doing that because if we were to administratively change things, as the government did, from Medicare locals to primary healthcare networks, the organisations would go through another round of organisational kind of disruption. We don't want to do that. This is obviously these are services which you rely on expertise, which you rely on people patiently building up skills over time. So it's important that we back in the professionals who do this job day in, day out.
We'll move along to another issue that stirs up some emotion, which is same-sex marriage. I'm going to go very quickly along the panel from left to right and ask, are you for or against, and why? Bob Day.
No, we do not support a change in the definition of marriage, and certainly not until we know the impact that it will have on the rights of children, the rights of parents, on the impact it will have on freedom of speech and freedom of conscience.
Nick Champion.
A Shorten Labor government would have a free vote of the Parliament within 100 days. I would vote in favour of marriage equality, and that would save the Australian taxpayer $160 million that the government will spend on a referendum.
Well, obviously, I support the plebiscite because this is such a big issue for the community, and I think that the best thing that we can do is to actually let them have their say. So I think that, I support the position of the coalition, and that is to go to a plebiscite, despite the fact that the Labor Party think it's a waste of money to allow the people to have a chance to have their say.
I support marriage equality, providing there are strong safeguards for religious organisations to be able to say no. I think that's important to have those religious safeguards built in, but also I'm prepared to vote on a free vote of the Parliament. If we have to have a plebiscite, so be it, but that $160 million could be spent on, for instance, mental health services and drug rehab services in regional communities.
I support marriage equality, and the Greens have got a bill before the Parliament. We could make it a reality if the PM gave a free vote to his members of Parliament. We don't need to see $160 million being spent on the plebiscite. The Parliament's elected to make those decisions, and let's get it done. Love is love.
And lastly, the debate about asylum seekers seems to become louder at every election, and is often bound up in a wider debate about multiculturalism in our society. Let's move beyond the slogans for a moment and think about Country SA in particular. Are asylum seekers and other migrants a threat or an opportunity for our country areas? Robert?
I think absolutely an opportunity for country areas, and I say that because this country has a really proud history when it comes to multiculturalism and being able to welcome people into our community. I think one of the really terrible things we've seen over the last decade is a very ugly debate about immigration and a demonising of some of the world's most vulnerable people, people who are coming here and looking for our help and our support. So that's why we're advocating to get rid of offshore processing and the billions of dollars that is spent on that, on these cruel camps. But yes, opportunities for regional South Australia would certainly come with that.
Anne Ruston.
Look, certainly there is no doubt that a workforce, adding to our workforce in our rural and regional areas is going to be a positive thing. However, we know, at the risk of coining a phrase that's been much used, we decide who comes here and how they come. And I think that the most important thing that we've done since we've been in government has been to stop the boats, stop the drowning at sea, to get just about every child out of detention. I think that is way, way more important than grandstanding on the issues that are currently being put out there.
Australia loves migrants, but in rural and regional areas we know how successful migrants have been, that there are over 30 million refugees in the world. We obviously can't take them all. It has to be done in an orderly way.
Well, it does have to be an orderly program, and people should arrive here safely, and that's why we've adopted offshore processing, but we would do it with appropriate safeguards and appropriate protection, and we would endeavour to resettle the people who are currently in offshore processing. My observation would be that most rural communities who have job skill issues, that is typically abattoirs and the like, do like to have people who are new arrivals, whether they're new arrivals from a refugee background, new migrants, or even if they're backpackers. Those workers tend to be lapped up, and they tend to settle and make good citizens. So why not have?
There are two issues here. One of migration, of course. Australia was built with a strong migration program, and my parents came from Greece and Cyprus respectively, and I'm glad they made the decision to come to this great nation and not somewhere else. But there's the other issue about people smugglers. We need to make sure that we shut that trade down. People did drown at sea, at least 1,200 that we know of. But in terms of those people in offshore detention centres, then we need to make sure that whistleblowers are protected, that they are treated humanely, but we cannot give any advantage to people smugglers.
So offshore detention is still the way to go as long as we do it right?
Well, look, it's an awful choice, but I don't. The alternative is to open up the people smuggling trade, but certainly there are real issues here about the humane treatment of those seeking asylum, and we need to find them a third country to go to sooner rather than later.
Can I say, to break the people smugglers' business model, we actually need to increase immigration to provide safer pathways for people, and to put more money into the UNHCR, again, to provide those safer pathways.
I don't disagree.
We don't need to have these island prisons.
Well, on that controversial note, we'll come to a close. We hope that these debates have helped you, our viewers, decide which party will get your vote in July. Thanks to our panellists, Bob Day, Nick Champion, Anne Ruston, Nick Xenophon and Robert Sims, for coming along and sharing your ideas about the future of country South Australia. From here in our studio at Fairfax Media, I'm Perry Strathern. Good night.